Handheld consoles were great. I say were because they are gone now. The 3DS was discontinued in 2020 with the eShop and servers all shut down by April earlier this year, and the Vita's production was cancelled even sooner.
It's a shame because they offered plenty of things that no other console could. Even though there are things like the Switch, Steam Deck, hell, even mobile phones, they just aren't the same. The Switch is basically a portable PS360 with a library that reflects that. The Steam Deck is a PC and has Metal Gear Survive. And mobile phone games are riddled with ads and rarely offer solid, immersive and meaningful experiences.
Handhelds, from the Game Boy all the way to the Vita, had unbelievable games that you just could not find anywhere else.
They allowed developers to take risks and make games at a fraction of the cost of their AAA counterparts. They also acted as a creative outlet for risky and less commercially viable games, as well as a safe space for indie devs to get their start without being trampled on. Let's take a look at a few examples, but first, a little bit of history.
The 64DD was a disk drive add-on for the Nintendo 64, but I don't blame you if you haven't heard of it. Imagine if the Virtual Boy in Wii U had a child, abandoned it in Bo Peep, west of Ballarat, and asked if anyone had seen it. That was pretty much the 64DD. It was announced in 1995, a year before the Nintendo 64 even released, and was delayed several times until it was released in Japan in late 1999. This was under 2 years before the GameCube launched, and just 3 months before the PS2. Because of this and many other problems, it was basically dead on arrival. This put studios developing games for it in a difficult spot, as they had already poured loads of time and resources into these games. Some had no option but to downsize, leaving the Game Boy Advance as the perfect platform for the release.
The first game we'll be talking about is Fire Emblem 64, which ended up becoming Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. Its development was announced in 1997 for the 64DD, but we all know how that turned out. Development was shifted to the GBA to ease development and reduce costs. In a 2002 interview about the Binding Blade's development, series supervisor Kentaro Nishimura, who was calm and strict, said that the game
was originally planned to be a GBA game from a very early stage. Of course, it was not just enthusiasm, requests from staff and fans, but also other factors such as development time and cost that were considered. The GBA was a console that was very easy to make software for in many ways.
Nishimura brought up another important point here. Although development began in 1997, the complete production of the final game took only around 12 months on GBA, according to director Tori Hiro, whose eyes shined with a deep gaze. This highlights just how beneficial downscaling a project to a handheld can be for developers. With a less powerful system, you've got less to do, so it can be done quickly and more cheaply.
Now, this next game went through a very similar situation, but the devs were driving blindfolded through a blizzard. The creation of Mother 3 began in 1994 for the Super Famicom. Mother is an RPG series known for its wonderful storytelling, often having humorous yet powerful writing, and when the team saw the innovation of Mario 64, development moved to the N64 so they could unshackle their creative freedom. The game's scope was so large that they scaled it back to half the size and moved again, this time to the 64DD. The console was dead by 2000 and so was the dev process, as the two producers, Iwata and Miyamoto, were busy making sure that the company actually had a home console. Iwata lamented in a 2000 interview that
We'd underestimated the cost, time, energy, and the compatibility required to make a 3D game, make that successfully. If we make the game in the future, we're going to need to go where the market is, and on a platform that's going to be an effective outlet for an eToy script.
Not only were the resources required for a game like this too much, but Iwata also
questioned how much eToy and his team should focus on creating a 3D world when eToy is a man whose greatest talent lies in words.
The GBA fit the bill for this game perfectly. 3 years later, a Japanese TV ad for Mother 1 and 2 announced that Mother 3 had restarted development for the GBA, and after another 3 years the game finally released. It began as 2D, quickly became 3D, and ended up as 2D again 11 years later. You could say it may have lost some of its immersion in the process, but who cares when this is the reaction the story gets.
ゲームボーイアドバンスマザー3。
Next, we'll be taking a look into the early indie scene and how handhelds played a part in its beginning. Nowadays, indie games are on every platform and often outnumber the number of quality games put out by AAA developers. After all, a game's quality is not determined by its budget. But in the early 2000s, being an indie developer was much harder. PC had not yet taken off as the colossus that it is today, and consoles frequently had high-profile blockbusters that stole the spotlight. Handhelds didn't really have this issue though, being that silly little goober chilling in the corner.
A key example of this is the developer WayForward. They were looking to break into the indie scene with their debut game, Shantae, a platformer for the Game Boy Color in 2002. The game released to critical acclaim, with outlets at the time saying it was
Love letter to the side-scrolling epic adventure of the NES.
and even that it
Does proper justice to the golden era of gaming.
Director Matt Bozon attributed Shantae's polish to the decision to develop it on the Game Boy Color, saying,
Typically, there's fewer cooks for handheld games. A small team can focus on making a good game and be relatively left alone. It allows for more creative freedom and flexibility of design, which ultimately leads to a better game. Also with Game Boy, if you get mad, you can throw it.
WayForward's small success caught the attention of several larger publishers, who gave them the opportunity to work on titles for notable franchises like Alien, Silent Hill, and many more. And all of this along with 4 more of their own Shantae games. Without Shantae or the Game Boy Color, there wouldn't be a WayForward, a beacon of hope to all indie devs out there.
The same cannot be said for Renegade Kid. Regardless, in 2007, co-founders Greg Hargrave and Jules Watsham saw an opportunity in the largely untouched horror genre on the DS with the first-person horror game Dementium: The Ward. Watsham said in a 2010 interview that Dementium
filled a hole in the market that wasn't being filled by anyone else.
Both developers also had experience with the N64, which had comparable hardware strength to the DS, making the latter an easy choice to develop Dementium 4. Unlike WayForward, Renegade Kid struggled financially.
We don't have huge piles of cash stuffed under our beds, so we had to dig into our own personal resources to keep things rolling.
Dementium released around the same time as Halo 3 and Call of Duty 4, making development for consoles like the 360 and PS3 financially stupid. Renegade Kid hasn't survived into the modern day in one piece, but the DS's low cost of development allowed them to release a handful of different, experimental games no one else was willing to take the plunge on.
Let's now move away from game development and focus on the games themselves. One obvious benefit of handhelds is that they aren't tied to a TV with a single display like home consoles are. They have the freedom to be whatever shape and have whatever features they want. The DS was famous for many things: Paris Hilton, selling like 150 million units, and having a microphone built in that never served a purpose. It also had 2 screens, one of which was touchscreen, and this allowed developers to do a ton of cool tricks.
"999" is a visual novel/puzzle game made for the DS by director and writer Kotaro Uchikoshi. The game takes place in 2027, and you play as a college student named Junpei. 9 people, including Junpei, have been abducted by a mysterious individual calling himself Zero, and are forced to play through the Nonary game, a series of deadly escape rooms behind 9 doors on a giant cruiser which will sink in 9 hours. Throughout the game, character dialogue is shown on the top screen, and a third-person narration is shown on the bottom screen. This makes 999's narrative easier to digest. You know that the top screen is the people talking and the bottom screen is what is happening to them. It's a small thing, but it improves the overall experience and lets you connect more with the story. But then, at the end of the game, this happens.
The top screen is Junpei's perspective in the present, and the bottom screen is not a third-person narration of Junpei, but Akane's perspective 9 years in the past. All puzzles in the game are solved on the bottom screen by Akane, with the solutions being sent to Junpei in the present through the morphogenetic field. But the final puzzle flips the whole thing upside down. What's up with that? Well, it's a handheld. Flip it back. Top screen, Junpei. Bottom screen, Akane. A twist like this is something that can only be done on a console with 2 screens. In fact, Uchikoshi said the following in a fan Q&A.
The game was designed specifically for the DS because of its unique interface. The DS has a top screen and a bottom screen, and I thought to myself, what can I do that utilizes this unique setup? The result I came up with was 999's Twist. So no, it wouldn't have worked on any other platform.
And he's not wrong. A 2017 remaster of 999 and its sequel, Virtua's Last Reward, released in 2017 on PC, PS4 and Xbox One. That is, 3 devices that only have 1 screen. The devs tried to get around this issue by having 2 modes, Adventure and Novel, which include text from the top and bottom screens respectively, and as they can't both be shown at once, the adventure script has been reworked to do a lot more telling and less showing.
Let's get the lights on first. And there's a switch over here. Okay, guys, I'm flipping it on. What? Hey. Oh, this looks like an explosion.
The remaster is passable, but it's nowhere near as horrifyingly visceral or evocative as the original is. And the ending of the course doesn't really work, if you force it to switch between 2 modes, and the fact you don't even need to use the novel mode at all means the significance of the twist simply won't land for some players. 999 is a game that only works on handhelds like the DS, and excels because of it.
The DS is home to a plethora of games like 999, which combine puzzles with a mystery visual novel. This also includes series like Ace Attorney and Professor Layton, as well as the lesser-known Another Code and Kyle Hyde games made by Sing. Whilst the case can be made for any of these games in terms of how the DS allowed them to do unique things with puzzles, Another Code 2 Memories is the best example for a few reasons. First of all, Ashley is such a scrunkly scrimblow, she's a little spoingle, and dare I say, even a might be. Also, compared to Ace Attorney and Professor Layton, Another Code has more puzzles than story and general exploration, which means the DS's features get more time to shine in its many puzzles. Have a look.
Unique to Another Code out of these games is the use of the DS's other features, like the microphone.
I lied.
Here's one point where it's used. Here's another puzzle where you need to stamp a piece of paper. The significance that the DS plays in these puzzles can be seen when comparing this game to its Switch remake, Another Code Recollection. The Ace Attorney and Layton games are also available on modern platforms and are, for the most part, better than the DS versions, even without the second screen. Recollection is a very good remake and perhaps even scrunkier than the original. But because the original game makes such extensive use of the DS's features, and because the Switch is unable to emulate them, Many of the puzzles are different or even absent entirely. The metal ball puzzle I mentioned earlier is replaced by this. The stamp puzzle is also replaced, and now you have to do a coin weighing puzzle. Understandably, they couldn't ask you to throw your Joy-Con at a wall to, say, break a vase to get a key, because it needs to be playable on the Switch Lite. But regardless, the new puzzles still take away a lot of creativity from the original. Two memories showed the world that, yes, you could scream at a DS. And recollections showed them that you could press a button. And where's the fun in that?
Fire Emblem Awakening is the final game that we'll be talking about in this video because it actually falls under both categories. When Awakening began development in 2010, Fire Emblem was declining in sales. The worldwide releases of the Blazing Blade and Sacred Stones kept the series relatively afloat, but sales dipped again with the Tellius games, and the DS remakes vowed to recapture the same audience from the GBA. In a 2013 interview with the Spanish magazine Hobby Gonzalez, the producer Hitoshi Yamagami said,
Nintendo's head of sales, Mr. Hatano, told us that this could be the last Fire Emblem. If the sales of this entry fell below 250,000 copies, we would stop working on them.
When asked if there was ever a game in development for the Wii U, Yamagami replied,
If we do it on Wii U, we have to make sure it sells 700,000 copies.
Whilst the figures he gave might not be entirely accurate, it's still clear that the console Fire Emblem was out of the question. As it was planned to be the final game, the developers essentially incorporated everything they wanted into it. New mechanics like pair-up and more social sim elements were introduced, and popular mechanics from past games were included, like the best one, child units?
What? No, trust me, it's peak. These, along with the 3DS's booming sales, which were at least 17 million units by Awakening's release, meant that Awakening sold a bit better than 250,000 copies. In fact, while unofficially, it's often cited online as the game that saved the franchise. As it was developed for the 3DS, it also took advantage of the touchscreen in the same way that the DS remakes had. Being a tactical or strategy RPG, there are many stats that the player needs to be on top of. To make this easier, the actual map and combat are just on the top screen, and all important information is clearly laid out and explained on the bottom screen. To show how this is an improvement, please welcome back Darcy. Hi everyone, today we're going to give Darcy a few Fire Emblem games and he's going to try and find the res stat. Alright Darcy, here's Fire Emblem the Blazing Blade. Find the res stat.
What? Is that something? What is it? Oh, that's a res. What is it? Shit, man. Wait, these are copy cards. Shit. How do I get that? Okay. Nope, back. That was back. Hang on. That's really good. Wait. I understand. What? That was back. All of them back. Wait, what? Oh.
There you go.
I got
there
it.
It is.
Magical resistance.
Alright Darcy, here's Fire Emblem Awakening. Do the same.
Okay, well, I can't figure out what any of these buttons do. Is this touch? Oh, this is touch screen. I got it. That was easy.
Alright Darcy, here's the final one. Fire Emblem Three Houses. Go for it.
Alright. So, I need to find some kind of... Okay, I'm looking for res. I don't know how to spell these. I'm stuck. Okay, what was that? This is touch screen. Goals, quests, saves, guides, options. I don't think it's anywhere here. Maybe inventory? Ability? No, it's not inventory. Roster, surely that's the characters. So I'm back here again. X says details. I'm looking for res. It should be in stats, right? Strength, magic, dex, speed, res.
And there we have
I got it.
Okay, Darcy, which one would you say is the easiest?
The second one.
And which one was the hardest?
The other two probably.
Alright then.
and on that bombshell,
Back to the studio.
So we see here that the 3DS's second screen allowed for a dense amount of information to be packed into an easy, accessible place. Of course, the improvement may be slight, but it's one nonetheless, and none of us would be here if Luca didn't say that it mattered. Anyway, because of the 3DS, Awakening had a great, easy-to-use UI, and without it, Awakening, along with all the other games that followed, may not have even existed at all.
Before we wrap things up, there's one more point we need to touch on, and that is community. Handhelds were obviously relatively cheap, so you could bring them outside with you to hang out with friends without too much worry. Games like Street Pass encouraged this gathering, with other users' Miis visiting your plaza to give you puzzle pieces and help you on a quest to rescue your own Mii. Something else that I've neglected to mention up to this point is the camera that some consoles have. What's a better way of making memories with friends than to take a photo with them?
Like here's Werribee Gorge, as seen by Luca's 3DS. And here's Luca taking a photo of Werribee Gorge on his 3DS, as seen by Luca's Vita. And here's Josh taking a photo of Luca, taking a photo of Werribee Gorge on his 3DS, on his Vita, as seen by Luca's phone. This is one time we went to a Korean barbecue place and got the best drink, Milkus. The camera, such a simple thing, a feature of everyone's phone nowadays, and yet one that no company had to include, but did anyway.
Their unique form factors let developers experiment with things no other console allowed for and bring quality of life improvements to enhance games' presentation.
The PS5 may have Metal Gear Survive, and I guess you can take it outside. But it doesn't have a camera.
It doesn't have a second screen.
It doesn't have a touch screen.
It doesn't really have a community.
And it certainly isn't cheap. The world has moved on from proper handhelds, and it has survived. We've moved on.
Well, I haven't.
And survived. One guy fell to his knees in coals. One guy fell to his knees in coals when Nintendo announced the eShop closure. But he's fine now. And that's all okay. So join us now as we celebrate the life and memories of handhelds.